Alara Vance moved through the bustling corridors of Northwood High like a ghost, a whisper amidst the shouts and laughter of hundreds. Her pale blue backpack, worn at the edges and slightly lopsided, seemed to cling to her thin frame, an extension of her desire to remain unseen. The fluorescent lights hummed above, casting a sterile glow on the lockers adorned with vibrant stickers and photos of smiling faces, none of them hers. She navigated the currents of students, her gaze fixed on the scuffed linoleum floor, a silent prayer escaping her lips. Just make it through the day. Just blend in. Her refuge, her sanctuary, was her bedroom, a small, unassuming space in a modest house on the quieter side of town. But within its four walls lay a universe of glorious, magnificent chaos. Piles of books teetered precariously on every surface. Half-empty mugs of forgotten tea stood sentinel beside stacks of art supplies, and rolls of sketch paper overflowed from a wicker basket in the corner. The walls themselves were a patchwork quilt of abstract prints she'd collected from thrift stores and art fairs, their vibrant hues clashing in a harmonious cacophony. Dominating the small desk in the center of the room was a precarious tower of notebooks, each one a different size, shape, and state of disarray. Some were spiral-bound, their wires bent and pages tearing free. Others were bound in weathered leather, their covers soft and yielding to the touch. All of them, however, held the tangible evidence of Alara's mind, a mind that saw the world not in clear, defined lines, but in swirling patterns, intersecting geometries, and a spectrum of emotions translated into abstract forms. Her most cherished possession was a thick, oversized sketch pad with a worn canvas cover, now soft from years of handling. Inside, it was a testament to her unique vision. Pages were filled with dense, overlapping patterns of lines, circles, and irregular polygons, sometimes rendered in stark black and white, sometimes exploding with colors so vivid they seemed to hum. There were no discernible objects, no landscapes, no portraits, just pure, unadulterated abstraction. Each page was a journey into a different corner of her subconscious, a visual diary of emotions too complex for words. She'd spend hours, sometimes entire nights, meticulously drawing, her hand moving with an almost unconscious fluidity, driven by an inner compulsion. To anyone else, they might have looked like nonsensical scribbles, childish scrawls, or, as some of her classmates derisively called them, messy jumbles. But to Alara, they were her voice, her language, her universe. Lunchtime at Northwood High was a battleground, a noisy, unforgiving arena where social hierarchies were brutally enforced. Alara always sought refuge in the farthest corner of the cafeteria, near a perpetually fogged window that overlooked the gloomy sports fields. Today was no different. She sat alone at a table designed for 6, her small brown paper bag clutched in her lap like a shield. She slowly unwrapped her sandwich, the silence at her table a stark contrast to the cacophony around her, the clatter of trays, the booming laughter of the football team, the high-pitched giggles of the popular girls. She tried to make herself small, to disappear behind her history textbook, but it was in futile effort. Her quiet presence, her very existence outside the social norm, seemed to attract attention like a moth to a flame. "Look what we have here," a voice drawled, dripping with sugary malice. Alara flinched, her eyes instinctively darting to the floor. She didn't need to look up to know who it was. Genevieve Thorne. Genevieve, with her perfectly straightened blonde hair, her designer clothes, and her entourage of identically styled girls who trailed behind her like obedient ducklings. Genevieve, whose carefully curated Instagram feed was the envy of half the school, and whose cruelties were as artfully executed as her perfectly manicured nails. Still eating that bland sandwich. "Alara," Genevieve's voice carried, drawing the attention of nearby tables. Her friends snickered, a chorus of mean girl laughter that echoed in the vast space. "Honestly, don't you ever get tired of beige?" A wave of heat crept up Alara's neck. She felt the familiar prickle of tears behind her eyes, but she swallowed them back, forcing herself to focus on the faint pattern on her tray. Don't react. Don't give them what they want. Genevieve leaned closer, her expensive perfume assaulting Alara's senses. And what's with that backpack? Did your grandmother knit it for you? So, retro. More laughter. Alara's grip on her sandwich tightened. She could feel every eye in the vicinity on her, dissecting her, judging her. The humiliation was a physical weight, pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. She wished for the floor to open up and swallow her whole. Just as the taunts began to escalate, a sudden, frantic fluttering sound cut through the cafeteria noise. Alara's head snapped up. Through the grimy window near her table, a small sparrow, disoriented and panicked, was desperately trying to escape, repeatedly crashing against the glass. Its tiny wings beat frantically, a symphony of terror. The noise drew a few curious glances, but most students simply shrugged it off, resuming their conversations. Genevieve and her friends barely registered it, too engrossed in their ritualistic torment of Alara. But Alara saw the bird. Its distress mirrored her own. A creature trapped and struggling against an invisible barrier. Without a second thought, without a word, she instinctively pushed herself away from the table. Genevieve paused her tirade, a smirk playing on her lips, probably expecting Alara to run away in tears. Instead, Alara walked slowly towards the window, her quiet footsteps almost imperceptible. She reached out a hesitant hand, not towards the bird directly, but towards the window latch. The glass was surprisingly stiff, but with a gentle tug, she managed to unlatch it, pushing it open just a crack. The cold autumn air rushed in, a welcome reprieve from the stale cafeteria heat. The sparrow, still frantic, paused its frantic flight for a moment, sensing the change. Alara extended her hand, palm flat, offering a silent, open invitation. The bird chirped, a tiny, hopeful sound. Then, with a final, desperate flutter, it squeezed through the narrow opening and vanished into the crisp blue sky, a tiny speck of freedom. Alara watched it go, a small, almost imperceptible smile touching her lips. For a brief moment, the suffocating weight of the cafeteria lifted. She felt a quiet satisfaction, a warmth spreading through her chest. It was a small act, unnoticed by most. But for Alara, it was a moment of connection, a subtle assertion of her inherent kindness and quiet strength. Across the room, at the teacher's table, Mr. Harrison, the school's art teacher, observed the scene. He was a man of quiet demeanor himself, with kind eyes and a perpetually paint-stained sweater. He had always noticed Alara, her quiet intensity, the way she would doodle intricate patterns on the margins of her notes when she thought no one was looking, the almost spiritual focus she brought to even the simplest art assignments. He'd seen the way students, particularly Genevieve, treated her. And he'd just witnessed her small act of compassion. A faint smile touched his lips. He saw more than just a quiet, bullied girl. He saw a soul of quiet dignity, a hidden depth. Alara turned back to her table. The brief moment of peace shattered as Genevieve's voice cut through the air again. Well, look at that. Our little bird whisperer. Still, doesn't change the fact that you're a total loser. Alara ignored her, returning to her half-eaten sandwich. The food now tasted like ash. But the image of the sparrow soaring into the sky remained, a tiny beacon of hope in the suffocating grayness of her day. That evening, tucked away in her cluttered room, Alara lost herself in her notebooks. She flipped through pages filled with sprawling, interconnected lines that resembled complex circuit boards, and others bursting with amorphous blobs of color that seemed to shift and merge like clouds. Her fingers traced the textures of the paper, feeling the indentations left by her pencils and pens. Each notebook was a chapter of her life, a raw, unfiltered expression of her innermost thoughts and feelings. She pulled out her oldest notebook, a thin, dog-eared composition book with a faded cover. She rarely opened this one, its contents holding a particular vulnerability. On the first page, in a childish, uncertain hand, was a drawing of a swirling vortex, a riot of blues and greens. Below it, scrawled in an almost illegible scribble, was her name, Alara, a memory, fleeting and shimmering, surfaced from the depths of her mind. She was no older than 5, sitting on the faded carpet of their cramped living room. Her mother, a single parent who worked 2 jobs to make ends meet, was perched on the edge of the worn sofa, her face etched with exhaustion, but her eyes soft with affection. Alara had been absorbed, utterly lost in the act of drawing on a discarded napkin, her small hand moving with an intensity that belied her age. She was creating something abstract, even then, a jumble of lines and shapes that made perfect sense only to her. Her mother had watched her, a mixture of pride and something akin to bewilderment on her face. "What are you drawing, sweetie?" she had asked, her voice gentle. Alara, without looking up, had simply mumbled, "It's feelings." Her mother had smiled, a wistful, knowing smile, and simply stroked her hair. The memory faded, leaving Alara with a vague sense of unease and a stronger sense of her own unique, often misunderstood, world. It was a world she kept fiercely guarded, a secret garden of lines and colors that few, if any, truly understood. She closed the old notebook, a sigh escaping her lips. The incident with Genevieve still stung, a persistent ache beneath her skin. She hated the feeling of being exposed, of having her private world ridiculed. But as she looked at the mountain of notebooks on her desk, a quiet defiance stirred within her. They were messy. Yes, they were different. But they were hers. And in their intricate patterns, their chaotic beauty, lay a truth that Genevieve, in her perfectly ordered, superficial world, could never comprehend. The thought was a small comfort, a tiny ember of strength in the quiet solitude of her room. She knew, deep down, that these notebooks were more than just paper and ink. They were a part of her, an extension of her very soul. And though the world outside might call them messy, she knew, in her heart, that they held a magic all their own, a magic that was still waiting to be truly seen. She picked up her current notebook, its cover a mosaic of faint coffee stains and pencil marks, and opened it to a fresh page. Her fingers instinctively reached for her favorite black felt-tip pen. The world outside, with its bullies and its judgments, faded away. There was only the blank page, the steady rhythm of her breathing, and the intricate dance of lines waiting to be born. She began to draw, the tip of her pen scratching softly against the paper. Each stroke a silent act of rebellion, a reaffirmation of her own unique path. She lost herself in the labyrinth of lines, finding a quiet, profound solace in the act of creation, building her own world, one abstract design at a time. The world could call it messy, but to her, it was perfect. And perhaps, just perhaps, one day, someone else would see it too. She continued drawing long into the night, the only sounds the rustle of turning pages and the soft scratching of her pen. Outside, the suburban streetlights cast long shadows, and the world slept. But in Alara's room, a vibrant, complex universe was coming to life, one meticulous line, one swirling pattern at a time. Her messy notebooks were not just a reflection of her inner world, they were the very fabric of it, a constant, evolving landscape of her unarticulated dreams and desires. And as the hours passed, and the pile of finished pages grew, Alara felt a quiet sense of peace settle over her, a fragile but persistent hope that someday, her true self, as expressed in these silent, intricate works, would finally be seen and understood, not as a jumble, but as a masterpiece. The anticipation, though distant, was a gentle hum beneath the surface of her quiet existence. The following Monday dawned with a false sense of peace. Alara had spent the weekend burrowing deeper into her notebooks, finding a quiet resilience in the rhythmic drag of her pen across paper. She hoped the incident in the cafeteria had been an isolated event, a fleeting storm that had passed. She was wrong. Some storms gather strength quietly, waiting for the perfect moment to unleash their full fury. The assembly hall at Northwood High was a cavernous space, usually reserved for pep rallies, graduation ceremonies, and the occasional, painfully dull lecture on responsible digital citizenship. Today, it was packed to capacity for the annual Fall Festival kickoff, an event designed to whip up school spirit and, more importantly, collect donations for various school clubs. The air hummed with restless energy, a cacophony of adolescent chatter that reverberated off the high ceilings. Rows of folding chairs stretched seemingly endlessly, filled with students fidgeting, whispering, and occasionally launching crumpled paper airplanes towards the stage. Elara, as always, found herself a seat on the periphery, near one of the emergency exits, hoping to be forgotten in the sea of faces. She hugged her worn backpack closer, its familiar weight a small comfort. Inside, nestled amongst her textbooks and a half-eaten granola bar, was her most prized possession, the oversized sketch pad, the one with the worn canvas cover. It was an extension of her soul, a repository of her deepest thoughts and most complex emotions, rendered in an intricate language of lines and shapes that only she understood. She rarely brought it to school, preferring to keep its fragile contents safe within the confines of her room. But today, she needed its tactile presence, a small anchor in the tumultuous waters of high school. On stage, Principal Sterling, a man whose every utterance seemed to be delivered with the forced enthusiasm of a game show host, droned on about fundraising goals and community engagement. Alara's eyes glazed over, her mind drifting to the patterns unfolding in her head. She longed to pull out her notebook, to capture the swirling vortex of abstract forms that was coalescing in her imagination. But she knew it was too risky. Not here. Not now. Suddenly, a ripple of movement disturbed the calm in her section. Laughter, sharp and cutting, pierced the general hum. Ilara's stomach clenched. She didn't need to look. She knew. Genevieve Thorne and her relentless entourage. They were making their way down the aisle, a glittering, confident procession, clearly late, but entirely unconcerned. Genevieve, with her perfectly coiffed hair and a smirk that spoke volumes of self-importance, led the charge, her eyes scanning the rows, searching. And then, their gazes met. A cold, knowing glint in Genevieve's eyes sent a shiver down Alara's spine. It was a predator's stare, zeroing in on its prey. Alara instinctively lowered her head, trying to become invisible, to shrink into the flimsy plastic chair. Genevieve paused directly beside Alara's aisle, her friends fanning out behind her, blocking the narrow passage. Well, if it isn't our resident artist, Genevieve purred, her voice loud enough for those nearby to hear. Her tone was laced with an insidious sarcasm that made Alara's skin crawl. Still carrying around your masterpieces? Alara kept her head down, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She tightened her grip on the straps of her backpack, trying to appear oblivious. But Genevieve wasn't to be ignored. "Oh, look," Genevieve continued, her voice rising in mock concern. "She's practically clutching it. Is it filled with more of those interesting scribbles?" Before Alara could react, before she could even process what was happening, Genevieve's hand darted out. It wasn't a gentle nudge, but a deliberate, forceful shove. Alara felt a jarring tug on her backpack. Her eyes widened in horror as the worn strap, already weakened, gave way with a sickening rip. Her backpack, no longer tethered, tumbled to the floor with a dull thud. The contents spilled out in a chaotic cascade: textbooks, a crumpled tissue, a half-eaten apple, and then, in agonizing slow motion, the oversized canvas-covered sketch pad. It landed face down, its pages, so carefully guarded, now splayed open, a vibrant explosion of lines and colors against the dull linoleum. Other notebooks, smaller and equally messy, followed, scattering like fallen leaves. A hush fell over Ilara's immediate vicinity. Heads turned. Whispers started. A growing murmur that spread through the section like wildfire. Genevieve, triumphant, bent down with exaggerated grace. Her perfectly manicured fingers, tipped with a glossy red polish, picked up the main sketch pad. She held it aloft, like a trophy, her eyes gleaming with malicious glee. "Oh my gosh, what is this?" she shrieked, her voice feigning shock, but her eyes betraying pure malice. She flipped open a page, displaying a particularly intricate, densely layered abstract pattern of intersecting circles and jagged lines. "It looks like a kindergartner's nightmare. Is this supposed to be art, or just a really bad case of spaghetti brain?" Her friends erupted in a fresh wave of laughter, louder this time, more confident, fueled by the public spectacle. Students in nearby rows craned their necks, giggling, pointing. The humiliation was immediate and absolute, a hot, searing wave that washed over Ilara, leaving her breathless. Her cheeks burned. She felt every single eye on her, every whispered comment, every dismissive chuckle. It was worse than the cafeteria. This was the entire student body, witnessing her deepest, most vulnerable self being torn apart, ridiculed, desecrated. Tears, hot and stinging, welled in her eyes, threatening to spill. Her chest constricted, making it impossible to draw a full breath. Her hands trembled, uselessly. She felt an overwhelming urge to run, to flee this suffocating space, to disappear completely. Every instinct screamed for escape. But as Genevieve continued her cruel charade, flipping through another page, then another, mocking each unique design with a venomous commentary, something shifted within Ilara. The pain was still there, a sharp, physical ache. But beneath it, a tiny, furious ember began to glow. This wasn't just about her messy notebooks. This was about the sacred, unspoken language of her soul. This was about her art, the one thing that truly belonged to her, being trampled underfoot by someone who understood nothing but superficiality and cruelty. A deep-seated anger, unfamiliar and unsettling, began to rise. It wasn't a loud, explosive anger, but a quiet, simmering rage that hardened her gaze. She clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. Her breath hitched, no longer from fear, but from a desperate need to reclaim what was hers, to protect the fragile beauty that Genevieve was so carelessly destroying. She wanted to scream, to lash out, to snatch her notebooks back. The thought of physical confrontation, however, sent a fresh wave of terror through her. She was not a fighter. She was a quiet observer, a creator. The principal's voice, amplified by the hall's sound system, cut through the growing murmur. "Students, settle down. Let's show some respect." His words, however, were lost in the rising tide of amusement. He didn't seem to grasp the specific cruelty unfolding in front of him, only the general disruption. Then, a figure detached itself from the back row of teachers. Mr. Harrison. He walked with a quiet purpose, his gaze fixed on Ilara and the scattered pages. His face, usually gentle, held a flicker of something akin to quiet fury. He didn't shout. He didn't make a scene. He simply walked to where Genevieve stood, still preening with Ilara's sketchpad. "Ms. Thorne," Mr. Harrison said, his voice low but firm, cutting through the laughter like a scalpel. He extended a hand. "I believe that belongs to Ilara." Genevieve faltered, her smirk freezing. She hadn't expected a teacher to intervene, especially not Mr. Harrison, who often seemed lost in his own artistic world. For a split second, she looked as though she might defy him, but the quiet authority in his voice, the unyielding gaze in his kind eyes, made her hesitate. With a reluctant sneer, she slapped the sketchpad into his outstretched hand. "Mr. Harrison didn't acknowledge Genevieve. His eyes were solely on Alara. He knelt down, slowly, deliberately, and began to gather the scattered pages, treating each one with an almost reverent care. He smoothed a crumpled page, picked up a pen that had rolled away, and then, with utmost gentleness, placed the main sketchpad back into Alara's lap. His fingers briefly brushed hers, a silent gesture of support and understanding. He didn't say a word, but his eyes, warm and filled with empathy, spoke volumes. They told her, "I see you. I see your art. And it matters." Alara looked up at him, her eyes wide and glistening. The public humiliation still stung. But Mr. Harrison's quiet intervention, his unspoken defense, had created a small, defiant bubble of protection around her. He hadn't just retrieved her notebooks. He had, in that small act, affirmed her right to exist, to create, to be herself. The weight in her chest eased slightly. The furious ember within her, instead of dying down, solidified into a quiet resolve. The assembly continued, but for Alara, the world had irrevocably shifted. The incident, so devastating in its immediate impact, had also served as a strange kind of awakening. It had exposed her vulnerability, yes, but it had also, for the first time, ignited a spark of defiant self-worth. She could no longer pretend that her art was merely a private hobby, something to be hidden away. It had been dragged into the harsh light of public scrutiny, ridiculed, and then, surprisingly, quietly defended. The brief moment of intervention by Mr. Harrison had changed everything. It was a clear point of no return. Before, Alara could retreat, could pretend the bullying didn't affect her, could continue to hide her true self. But now, her most personal creations had been exposed. She couldn't unring that bell. The incident forced her to confront her long-held fear of being seen, of being judged for her unique way of seeing the world. It was terrifying. Yes, but also, strangely, liberating. Her sanctuary had been shattered, but in its ruins, a new, stronger foundation was beginning to form. She looked down at the canvas-covered sketchpad in her lap, its pages still slightly splayed open. It wasn't just a collection of drawings anymore. It was a battleground, and she had just taken the first, reluctant step towards defending it. The thought, daunting as it was, held a flicker of something powerful, a nascent courage, stirring within her quiet depths. As the assembly finally drew to a close, and students began to shuffle out, Alara remained seated for a moment, clutching her sketchpad. She saw Genevieve casting a triumphant, yet slightly puzzled, glance her way. Genevieve likely believed she had crushed Alara, but a seed of doubt had been planted by Mr. Harrison's unexpected intervention. Alara knew she couldn't go back to being entirely invisible. The quiet world she had built around herself, the one where her art was her secret solace, had been violently invaded. And though the pain of that invasion was still raw, a flicker of resolve burned brighter. The path forward was unclear, but one thing was certain: she could no longer hide. The world had seen a glimpse of her messy truth, and whether she liked it or not, she would now have to decide what to do with it. The memory of the bird flying free, and Mr. Harrison's quiet defense, gave her a sliver of strength she hadn't known she possessed. The echo of the assembly hall still resonated in Alara's mind days later. The humiliation lingered, a raw ache beneath her skin, but so too did the quiet dignity of Mr. Harrison's intervention. It had been a public exposure, a forced unveiling of her most private world, and the experience had left her feeling stripped bare, yet strangely, subtly, empowered. The fear of being seen was still potent, but it was now laced with a flicker of stubborn defiance. Life at Northwood High continued its relentless march, oblivious to Alara's inner turmoil. The chatter, the cliques, the endless social navigating. It all seemed so distant, so trivial now that her own quiet battle was beginning to unfold. She still sought refuge in the quiet corners of the library during lunch, and her backpack was now always clasped tightly, a physical barrier against further intrusions. But her mind, once solely focused on blending in, now wrestled with a new, unsettling question. What now? The answer, or at least the catalyst for it, arrived subtly, tacked onto the bulletin board outside the art room. Northwood High Annual Art Competition. Call for submissions. The vibrant poster, with its bold typography and splash of bright colors, seemed to mock Alara's desire for anonymity. This was Genevieve's territory, her annual coronation. Every year, Genevieve Thorne submitted a painstakingly realistic watercolor landscape or a meticulously rendered portrait, always winning the coveted Best in Show ribbon and the accompanying bragging rights. Her art was technically flawless, academically correct, and utterly devoid of anything that might be called raw emotion or genuine innovation. Alara would usually glance at the notice, dismiss it, and hurry on. But this time, something held her. Perhaps it was the lingering sting of Genevieve's taunts, or perhaps it was the memory of Mr. Harrison's quiet gaze as he gathered her scattered pages. An hour later, as she packed up her things at the end of Mr. Harrison's introduction to art class, she felt a tap on her shoulder. Alara. Mr. Harrison's voice was soft, almost a murmur, as if he sensed her unease. He held a new, pristine sign-up sheet for the art competition. I was just putting this up. Are you thinking of entering anything this year? Alara mumbled. I don't know, Mr. Harrison. She avoided his gaze, her eyes fixed on the spotless tile floor. The thought of exposing her art to public scrutiny again, especially to a panel of judges and the entire school, filled her with a fresh wave of dread. Mr. Harrison didn't press. He simply smiled, a small, knowing smile. Well, you know, sometimes the most compelling art isn't about what everyone expects. Sometimes it's about seeing things differently. He paused, then gestured vaguely towards her backpack. Like those designs you do, there's a remarkable energy in them. Alara, a unique vision. He said nothing more, merely placed the sign-up sheet on the desk, within easy reach, and walked away to speak to another student. But his words resonated, a quiet affirmation that echoed in Alara's mind. A unique vision. Had anyone ever called her vision unique before, or merely messy? The idea gnawed at her throughout the day. Submitting her art to the competition felt like throwing herself into the lion's den. Yet, the alternative, retreating, hiding, letting Genevieve's mockery be the final word, felt even worse. The anger, that tiny ember ignited in the assembly hall, had not died down. It had settled into a quiet resolve. That evening, Alara sat at her desk, surrounded by her notebooks. She didn't pick up her massive canvas-covered sketch pad. That felt too vulnerable, too raw for this initial foray. Instead, she chose a smaller, soft-cover notebook, one filled with more contained, yet still distinctly abstract, patterns. She flipped through the pages, her fingers tracing the intricate lines. She needed something that was undeniably her, but perhaps less aggressively messy to an untrained eye. She settled on a piece she'd done last spring, a complex network of interwoven lines and shapes in muted earth tones, suggesting a tangled forest floor seen from a molecular level. It was subtle, sophisticated in its complexity, and deeply personal. It also wouldn't immediately scream kindergartner's nightmare. The next day, with a pounding heart and clammy hands, Alara walked towards the art room after school. She clutched the chosen notebook, its cover a shield against her anxiety. The submission box was a large, cardboard carton near Mr. Harrison's desk. As she approached, she saw a figure already there, a swirl of blonde hair and designer jeans. Genevieve Thorne. Genevieve was in the process of carefully sliding a large, meticulously framed oil painting into the box. It was a still life of fruit, rendered with flawless realism. Every apple gleamed. Every grape was perfectly shadowed. It was technically perfect, as always, and utterly uninspired. Genevieve turned, sensing Ilara's presence. Her eyes, initially dismissive, narrowed when she saw the small notebook in Ilara's hand. "Oh, Ilara," she drawled, a smirk forming on her lips. "Decided to finally grace us with your genius. What is it this time?" A portrait of a crumpled paper ball. Her friends, who were lingering nearby, snickered. Ilara ignored her, her gaze fixed on the submission box. She walked past Genevieve, her hands still trembling slightly, and gently slid her notebook into the box, placing it carefully on top of Genevieve's large, pristine canvas. The muted tones of her abstract piece stood in stark contrast to the vibrant realism of the fruit painting. "Is that it?" Genevieve scoffed, peering over Ilara's shoulder. "A little notebook. That's your grand entry. Are you serious?" Her voice dripped with incredulity, bordering on outright contempt. "What are they even going to judge your inability to draw anything recognizable?" Ilara didn't respond. She simply straightened up, met Genevieve's gaze for a fleeting moment, a moment that held a new, quiet resolve, not fear, and then turned and walked away. She could feel Genevieve's eyes burning into her back, a mixture of disbelief and something colder. Ilara knew, in that instant, that her quiet act of defiance had struck a nerve. Genevieve had expected her to retreat, to disappear. Ilara had, instead, put herself back in the arena, even if only with a small, unassuming notebook. The next week passed in a blur of anxiety and nervous anticipation. Every bulletin board she passed felt like a potential source of judgment. Every whisper in the hall seemed to carry a hidden meaning. Ilara tried to distract herself with her studies, but her mind kept returning to the art competition. Had she made a mistake? Had she just invited more ridicule? Then came Friday. The school buzzed with an unusual energy. The preliminary results of the art competition were being posted on a large board outside the main office. A crowd had already gathered, students jostling for position, eager to see the names. Ilara approached the board with a sense of dread, her heart thudding like a drum against her ribs. She braced herself for disappointment, for her name to be absent from the list, or worse, for a new wave of mockery. She slowly pushed her way to the front, her eyes scanning the neatly typed columns. The finalists section was exactly as she expected Genevieve Thorne's name, bolded and at the top, alongside several other students known for their conventional, technically proficient art. Then, her eyes dropped lower, to a section she hadn't even considered. Honorable mentions. Her breath hitched. There, near the bottom, in a smaller font, but undeniably present, was her name, Ilara Vance. And next to it, the title of her piece, Subterranean Network. A quiet shock washed over her. Honorable mention. It wasn't the top prize, but it was far more than she had ever dared to hope for. It was recognition. It was validation. And it was a direct, unspoken rebuke to Genevieve's casual dismissal. A few feet away, Genevieve, surrounded by her usual coterie, was basking in the glow of her finalist status. She was laughing, pointing out her name to her friends, her triumph evident. Then her gaze, smug and self-satisfied, drifted down the list, perhaps to verify the absence of any true threats. Her eyes landed on Ilara's name in the honorable mentions section. Her laughter died. Her confident smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of disbelief. Her brow furrowed. Ilara Vance, she murmured, loud enough for her friends to hear. Honorable mention for that scribble that's impossible. One of her friends, a girl named Bethany, who usually echoed Genevieve's every sentiment, leaned in closer, a slight frown on her face. Wait, really, I thought her stuff was, Really weird. Genevieve's eyes, now colder than ever, darted from the list to Alara, who was still standing a few feet away, her surprise slowly giving way to a quiet sense of triumph. The look on Genevieve's face was no longer one of amusement, but of dawning, chilling jealousy. Her carefully constructed world, where her art was inherently superior and unchallenged, had just been subtly undermined. The following day, during art class, Alara found one of her smaller, less protected notebooks, one she often used for quick sketches during downtime, had been accidentally knocked off her desk. Its pages were slightly crinkled, and a few had faint, greasy smudges, as if someone had deliberately brushed their oily fingers across them. She looked up and caught Genevieve's eye across the room. Genevieve held a casual, innocent expression, but there was a subtle, almost imperceptible tilt to her lips, a spark of satisfaction in her eyes. It was a silent message. Clear as day, I see your small victory, and I will not allow it. This quiet act of sabotage, born of envy, solidified Genevieve's role as antagonist type a clear and present threat. Unbeknownst to Alara, the ripple effect of her honorable mention extended beyond the school walls. Miles away, in a brightly lit office filled with avant-garde sculptures and stacks of art journals, sat Ms. Evelyn Reed. Ms. Reed was an art scout for the prestigious Maxwell Gallery, renowned for discovering groundbreaking talent and cultivating the next generation of artistic visionaries. She had an eye for the unconventional, a keen appreciation for art that defied categorization, and an almost intuitive ability to spot genius in its nascent, often messy, forms. She was reviewing the lists of submissions from local high school art competitions, a routine task that rarely yielded anything beyond polite, academic proficiency. Her gaze drifted over the familiar names, the usual still lifes and landscapes, until a particular entry snagged her attention. Northwood High, honorable mention Alara Vance, Subterranean Network. The title itself was intriguing, hinting at something deeper than typical student work, and an honorable mention for an abstract piece in a school known for its traditional bent. That was unusual. Very unusual. Ms. Reed leaned forward. Her interest piqued. She picked up her phone and dialed. "Mr. Harrison," she said, her voice smooth and professional. "Evelyn Reed here. I'm looking at the Northwood High Art Competition results. I'm particularly interested in an honorable mention by a student named Alara Vance. Can you tell me more about her work, this Subterranean Network? It sounds quite unique." Mr. Harrison, surprised but pleased, readily agreed to meet with her, eager to sing Alara's praises. He mentioned her quiet nature, the depth of her focus, and the extraordinary, almost architectural complexity of her notebook drawings. He spoke of how Alara saw the world in patterns, in raw, abstract forms. Ms. Reed listened intently, a growing excitement building within her. This sounded exactly like the kind of raw, undiscovered talent she actively sought. Back at Northwood High, Alara remained unaware of the professional interest her art had garnered. She was still grappling with the immediate aftermath of her small victory and Genevieve's escalating antagonism. The smudged pages of her notebook were a stark reminder that her brief moment of recognition had come at a cost. The road ahead would not be easy. Genevieve would not simply concede defeat. But as Alara walked home that evening, the weight of her backpack felt lighter than usual. The honorable mention wasn't just a ribbon. It was a tiny crack in the wall of invisibility she had built around herself. A sliver of light hinting at a world beyond the confines of Northwood High. And in that light, a fragile new courage began to take root, urging her to protect not just her art, but her very identity. The game had truly begun. The week following the preliminary art competition results felt like an uneasy truce. Alara's honorable mention had granted her a fragile shield, a momentary reprieve from the relentless social battering, but it was a fragile peace, a calm before the next storm. Genevieve Thorne's thinly veiled animosity had intensified, turning from dismissive amusement to a cold, calculating jealousy. Alara felt Genevieve's eyes on her in the hallways, a silent, predatory gaze that promised retribution. The smudged pages of her small notebook served as a constant, subtle reminder that the battle for recognition was far from over. The grand finale of the Northwood High Annual Art Competition was an event of considerable prestige, drawing not just students and faculty, but also proud parents, local art enthusiasts, and even, on occasion, a curious scout from a regional gallery. This year, the stakes felt exceptionally high for Alara, though only she, Mr. Harrison, and perhaps Genevieve, truly understood why. For Alara, it was not just about art. It was about validation, about reclaiming her narrative from the cruel dismissals of others. The event was held in the school's sprawling auditorium, a space that usually buzzed with the nervous energy of theatrical productions or the raucous cheers of pep rallies. Tonight, however, it had been transformed. The stage, usually a platform for performances, now served as a brightly lit arena for artistic combat. Rows of pristine white easels, each holding a blank, imposing canvas, stood ready under the glare of professional stage lights. These were not the flimsy student easels from art class. They were sturdy, imposing structures, designed to hold large-scale works. The scent of fresh canvas and new paint hung faintly in the air, a potent mix of promise and apprehension. This was the very same auditorium where Alara had endured her most profound public humiliation, where her treasured notebooks had been scattered and ridiculed just weeks prior. The memory was sharp, vivid. She could almost hear Genevieve's taunting voice, the cruel laughter echoing off these very walls. The irony was not lost on her. She was now willingly stepping back into the crucible of her past trauma. But this time, she held a brush instead of a crumpled lunch bag. This was her chance to redefine this space, to imbue it with a new, powerful meaning. Alara arrived early, her heart thrumming against her ribs like a trapped bird. She wore a simple, dark blue shirt and jeans, practical and unremarkable, a stark contrast to the more flamboyant attire of some of the other finalists. Her art supplies, meticulously organized in a new canvas tote bag Mr. Harrison had given her, felt impossibly heavy. She walked onto the stage, her footsteps echoing in the vast, still space, and found her designated easel. It was positioned near the center, under one of the brightest spotlights, a fact that made her stomach clench with anxiety. She was hyper-aware of every detail, the subtle hum of the ventilation system, the distant murmur of arriving spectators, the cool smoothness of the blank canvas waiting for her. One by one, the other finalists arrived. Genevieve Thorne swept in last, of course, radiating an aura of confident superiority. She wore a stylish, smock-like artist's tunic over her expensive clothes, her hair impeccably styled. Her own easel was strategically placed, just a few feet from Alara's, a deliberate proximity that felt less like coincidence and more like a calculated challenge. Genevieve glanced at Alara, a smirk playing on her lips, a silent message that seemed to say, "You might have gotten an honorable mention, but this is my stage, my victory." Her friends, a gaggle of whispering girls, settled into the front row of the audience, their eyes fixed on Genevieve with adoring anticipation. Among the early arrivals in the audience were Mr. Harrison and, to Alara's surprise, a poised woman with intelligent, discerning eyes. Alara recognized her from photographs online, Ms. Evelyn Reed, the art scout from Maxwell Gallery. Ms. Reed was accompanied by Mr. Harrison, and their presence filled Alara with a mixture of intense pressure and a fragile flicker of hope. She knew, with a sudden, overwhelming certainty, that Ms. Reed was here specifically because of her. This was not just a high school competition anymore. This was an audition, a moment that could change the trajectory of her life. Principal Sterling, beaming with practiced enthusiasm, finally stepped onto the stage, microphone in hand. "Welcome, everyone, to the final round of the Northwood High Annual Art Competition," he boomed, his voice echoing. After a few introductory remarks and acknowledgments of the judging panel, which included local artists and a representative from a regional art museum, he announced the challenge. "For this final round," he declared, "our talented finalists will be creating a new piece of art on this blank canvas, right here, right now." A ripple of excitement, mixed with nervous murmurs, swept through the audience and the contestants. "And the theme for today, revealed just moments ago, is..." He paused for dramatic effect. "The interconnectedness of nature and technology." Alara's mind raced. The interconnectedness of nature and technology. It was abstract, yet concrete enough to inspire. It was perfect for her unique way of seeing the world, a fusion of organic complexity and structured patterns. She felt a surge of creative energy, a familiar itch to put pen to paper, or in this case, brush to canvas. "You will have precisely 3 hours to complete your masterpiece," Principal Sterling announced, gesturing to a large digital clock projected onto the backdrop. The numbers glowed ominously, 030000. "And your time starts now." A buzzer sounded, sharp and piercing. The auditorium, which had been buzzing with chatter, fell into a collective hush as the artists began. Alara took a deep breath, trying to steady her trembling hands. She felt every eye in the audience on her. She was acutely aware of the judging panel, poised with their clipboards, their gazes analytical. She could feel Genevieve's smug, confident energy just a few feet away, already sketching out a realistic depiction of circuit boards entwined with tree roots, a literal, predictable interpretation of the theme. In this decisive moment, Alara felt utterly alone. The pressure was immense. This wasn't a private sketch in her notebook, where mistakes could be erased, pages torn out, and no one would ever see. This was a public display, with a ticking clock, and the future of her artistic aspirations hanging in the balance. There was no one to help her, no one to offer a quiet word of encouragement now. This was her trial by fire, and she had to face it entirely on her own. She closed her eyes for a brief second, clearing her mind. She pushed away the memory of Genevieve's taunts, the smudged pages, the humiliation. She focused only on the theme, on the way her mind inherently saw patterns, the invisible networks that connected everything, the fractal geometry of a leaf, the complex circuitry of a microchip. It was all a symphony of lines and forms to her. She uncapped a large tube of deep indigo paint, then a shimmering silver. Her first stroke was a bold, sweeping curve across the upper left of the canvas, almost haphazard, then another intersecting it, forming a nascent, irregular shape. It looked to the uninitiated eye like a chaotic start. From the front row, Genevieve's clique exchanged knowing glances and suppressed giggles. Bethany, one of Genevieve's usual followers, leaned over and whispered to another girl, "What is she doing? Looks like she's just throwing paint on it." Genevieve herself glanced over, a look of smug satisfaction on her face. Her own canvas was already taking shape, a recognizable, if uninspired, blueprint. As Alara continued to work, she felt a familiar flow state begin to take over. Her hands, initially trembling, now moved with a surprising confidence and speed. She layered colors, dark purples, vibrant greens, electric blues, interspersed with metallic silver and copper, creating depth and texture. Her brushstrokes were precise, yet appeared fluid and organic, building intricate webs of lines and shapes that twisted and turned, reminiscent of both intricate natural veins and complex digital circuitry. The pressure of the time limit was a constant, gnawing presence, but she used it. It pushed her to make instinctive choices, to trust her gut, to let the art flow out of her without overthinking. She rarely paused, moving rhythmically between her palette and the canvas, her concentration absolute. Halfway through the allotted time, a small distraction occurred. Bethany, who had seemingly gone to refill her water bottle, returned to her seat. As she passed Alara's station, her foot seemed to catch. A full, clear plastic bottle of water tumbled from her hand, splashing with a loud thwack dangerously close to Alara's palate and the lower edge of her canvas. Alara flinched, startled, her concentration momentarily shattered. A few droplets of water splattered onto the pristine white surface next to her painting area, but thankfully, her actual artwork remained untouched. She shot a glance at Bethany, whose face was a mixture of feigned alarm and, for a fleeting second, a flicker of genuine regret, almost fear. Bethany quickly mumbled an apology, her eyes darting nervously towards Genevieve before scurrying back to her seat. Genevieve, however, hadn't missed a beat. She had seen the accident. A triumphant gleam appeared in her eyes. She knew this was a subtle attempt to rattle Alara, to throw her off her game. The public setting, the ticking clock, the accidental spill. It all served to amplify Alara's sense of being alone against a world that seemed determined to trip her up. Alara paused, took a deep, shaky breath, and wiped the few stray drops of water from her workspace. For a moment, the old fears threatened to resurface. The whispers, the mockery, the feeling of being an outsider. But then, she thought of the sparrow, flying free. She thought of Mr. Harrison's quiet defense, and she looked at her canvas, at the nascent masterpiece that was beginning to emerge, raw and powerful. This was her voice. This was her truth, and she would not let a clumsy accident or a jealous rival silence it. With renewed resolve, she picked up her brush. Her movements became even more deliberate, more focused. The accident had only served to steel her resolve, to harden her determination. She dove back into her work, losing herself completely in the dance of colors and lines, transforming the canvas from a blank expanse into a dynamic, pulsating vision. The clock continued its relentless march, but for Alara, time had ceased to exist. There was only the canvas and the profound, silent act of creation. The ultimate test was underway, and Alara, the quiet underdog, was facing it head-on, alone yet resolute. The pressure was immense, but so too was the blossoming power of her unique talent. The digital clock on the auditorium backdrop glared down, its luminous red digits relentlessly ticking away the remaining minutes. 2 hours had passed, and the tension in the hall was palpable, a thick, almost suffocating presence that pressed down on Alara. Her initial burst of creative energy, the defiant surge that had propelled her through the first hour, was starting to wane, replaced by a growing weariness and the insidious creep of doubt. She glanced at Genevieve's canvas. It was nearing completion, a meticulously rendered landscape where delicate, shimmering circuit board patterns were woven into the bark of trees and the veins of leaves. It was technically flawless, undeniably beautiful in a conventional sense, and utterly predictable. The judges, their faces impassive, nodded occasionally as they surveyed Genevieve's work, their expressions reflecting a quiet approval. This was the kind of art they expected, the kind that won awards. Alara's own canvas, by contrast, looked to an untrained eye like a maelstrom of controlled chaos. Layers of color, some opaque, some translucent, built upon each other in a swirling, intricate dance. Lines, both stark and ethereal, intersected and diverged, creating complex geometric patterns that seemed to shift and reform as one looked at them. There were no discernible trees, no obvious circuit boards, just pure, unadulterated abstraction, a visual symphony of interconnectedness that Alara felt rather than saw in her mind. And that was the problem. Would anyone else feel it, or would they just see a messy jumble, another kindergartner's nightmare? Just as Genevieve had declared in the assembly hall, the memory of that public humiliation, the snickers, the scorn, echoed in her ears. She felt a cold dread gripping her heart. What if she had misjudged? What if her unique vision was just incomprehensible. She hesitated, her brush hovering over a patch of deep violet. Her hand, which had moved with such fluid confidence moments ago, now trembled noticeably. A fresh wave of self-doubt washed over her, chilling her to the bone. This isn't good enough. It's too different. They'll never understand. The murmurs from the audience, which she had successfully blocked out, now seemed to filter through, each whisper a judgment. She imagined their faces, their confused frowns, their eventual disappointment. For a terrifying, agonizing moment, Elara felt as though she might truly fail. Her heart pounded, a frantic drumbeat of despair. Her vision blurred, not with tears, but with a sudden, overwhelming sense of futility. She looked at the remaining blank space on the canvas, a vast, mocking emptiness, and felt a wave of nausea. The buzzer would sound soon, and she would have nothing to show but a chaotic mess, a testament to her inability to conform, to create something conventionally beautiful. Then, in that exact moment of near failure, something snapped within Elara. It wasn't a sudden burst of inspiration, but a deep, quiet refusal to surrender. She took a ragged, gasping breath and slowly, deliberately, closed her eyes for a split second. And in that brief darkness, she saw them, the intricate, mesmerizing patterns that danced behind her eyelids. Not the chaotic jumbles others saw, but the elegant, ordered complexity that was her true language. She saw the swirling blues of her oldest notebook, the delicate interweaving lines of subterranean network that had earned her an honorable mention, the quiet dignity of Mr. Harrison's eyes as he gathered her scattered pages, and the tiny sparrow, soaring free against the boundless sky. She heard her mother's soft voice, from years ago, saying, "It's feelings." This wasn't about winning. This was about expressing those feelings, about being true to the unique way her mind worked, about finally unveiling the labyrinth of her soul. Her eyes snapped open. The trembling in her hands stopped. A quiet, fierce determination settled over her features, replacing the anxiety with a serene, almost detached focus. She picked up a thin, fine-tipped brush, dipped it into a vibrant, almost electric, cerulean blue, and began to work on the canvas again. Every single action, every stroke, was now imbued with purpose and precision. She moved slowly at first, each movement deliberate, almost meditative. Her brows furrowed in intense concentration, her lips pressed into a thin line. She wasn't merely applying paint, she was weaving light and shadow, creating intricate connections where none had seemed to exist before. She began to overlay delicate, almost invisible lines of gold and silver onto the deeper blues and purples, like veins of a hidden network pulsating beneath the surface. These weren't lines to define objects, but lines that defined energy, flow, and abstract relationships. Her eyes, usually downcast, were now alight with an inner fire, darting between her mental image and the canvas, ensuring every stroke translated the vision accurately. A bead of sweat trickled down her temple, but she was oblivious to it. Her breathing became shallow, rhythmic, the only sound in her immediate vicinity, the soft, whisper-like scratch of her brush against the canvas. She added flecks of iridescent green, like hidden pockets of life, and then a bold, almost jarring splash of crimson in a corner, drawing the eye, creating a point of tension and release within the larger composition. The shift in her demeanor, her newfound intensity, drew the attention of the audience. The judges, who had previously been exchanging polite notes about Genevieve's work, now found their gazes irresistibly drawn to Elara's easel. They leaned forward, their expressions shifting from polite interest to genuine curiosity, then to a dawning, silent awe. They watched her, transfixed, as she seemed to conjure form out of formlessness, order out of perceived chaos. Genevieve, meanwhile, was putting the finishing touches on her own painting, a satisfied smirk on her face. She glanced over at Alara, expecting to see a defeated, struggling artist. What she saw, however, caused her smug smile to falter, then to vanish entirely. Alara was no longer tentative. She was a force of nature, her small frame radiating an intense focus, her brush moving with an almost otherworldly grace. And the canvas, it was no longer a jumble. It was a living, breathing entity, mesmerizing in its complexity and depth. Genevieve's eyes widened, a flicker of pure, unadulterated fear and disbelief crossing her features. Her perfect conventional art suddenly seemed dull, lifeless, utterly overshadowed. The clock on the backdrop pulsed, then began its final, agonizing countdown. 10, 9, 8. Alara's final strokes were swift, decisive. She added a delicate, almost invisible shimmer of pearlescent white along certain key lines, making them seem to glow from within, connecting the disparate elements into a unified, breathtaking whole. It was a finishing touch that elevated the piece from excellent to truly transcendent. "Mama." The buzzer blared, a loud piercing shriek that cut through the silence of the auditorium. Alara dropped her brush into the water pail with a gentle splash, then slowly stepped back from her easel, her chest heaving, a faint flush on her cheeks. She looked at her finished work, a profound sense of exhaustion and quiet triumph washing over her. For a long moment, the auditorium remained in a profound, stunned silence. No one moved. No one spoke. All eyes were fixed on Alara's canvas. Then, a single, clear sound cut through the quiet, a solitary clap. It came from the back of the auditorium, from Ms. Evelyn Reed, the art scout. Her face, usually composed, was alight with an almost incandescent joy and recognition. Her eyes were wide, glistening with unshed tears of pure admiration. She clapped again, louder this time, and then the spell broke. One by one, like a wave building in momentum, others began to clap. First, Mr. Harrison. His face split into a wide, proud smile, tears openly streaming down his cheeks. Then, the judging panel, their initial impassive expressions replaced by open-mouthed astonishment and profound respect. Their claps were firm, resonant, acknowledging true genius. The students in the audience, initially quieted by the judge's reaction, now erupted. A wave of thunderous applause swept through the hall, growing in volume and intensity. Whistles and cheers mixed with the clapping. Faces, which had been skeptical, even dismissive, were now transformed. They reflected a mixture of disbelief, then wonder, then overwhelming admiration. Many students, even some who had once mocked her, openly gaped, their mouths agape, their eyes fixed on the vibrant canvas, unable to comprehend the sheer transformation. Bethany, the girl who had accidentally spilled water, stood frozen, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and profound regret. A single tear tracked a path down her cheek, a silent acknowledgement of the beautiful, powerful creation before her, and the ugly role she had played in trying to hinder its birth. Alara stood before her easel, blinking in the glare of the lights, overwhelmed by the sudden explosion of sound and emotion. She had expected judgment, perhaps a polite acknowledgement. She had never, in her wildest dreams, anticipated this. The wave of applause washed over her, not as a threat, but as a warm, validating embrace. It was a cacophony of sound, yet it felt like the sweetest music she had ever heard. It was not just applause for her art. It was applause for her, for the quiet girl who had dared to be different, who had dared to unveil her unique soul. The vindication was complete, profound, and utterly breathtaking. She had faced her ultimate test, and she had emerged, not just victorious, but undeniably, brilliantly, vindicated. The world had finally seen her. The thunderous applause that had engulfed the Northwood High auditorium slowly, reluctantly, subsided, leaving behind a charged silence. a palpable sense of awe that still vibrated in the air. Alara stood before her victorious canvas, still slightly breathless, the heat of the spotlights a tangible warmth on her face. Her heart, once a frantic hummingbird, now beat with a steady, triumphant rhythm. She was no longer invisible. She was seen, truly seen, for the first time. Principal Sterling, his usually boisterous demeanor softened by genuine amazement, stepped forward. "Judges," he announced, his voice hushed, almost reverent. "Your decision." The head judge, a renowned local artist with a stern but fair reputation, rose from her seat. Her gaze, which had been sharply critical all evening, now held a profound reverence as she looked at Alara's piece. "There is no debate," she stated, her voice clear and resonant throughout the quiet hall. "The winner of this year's Northwood High Annual Art Competition, for a work of astounding originality, depth, and sheer genius, is Alara Vance." The announcement was met with a fresh wave of applause, perhaps even more fervent than before. Students cheered, teachers smiled, and parents beamed. Alara felt a blush creep up her neck, but this time it was a blush of pride, not shame. She stepped forward, accepting the gleaming trophy from Principal Sterling, its metallic surface cool against her trembling hands. The weight of it was substantial, a physical manifestation of her hard-won victory. As she stood there, basking in the unexpected warmth of recognition, a figure detached herself from the judging panel and made her way directly to Alara. It was Ms. Evelyn Reed, the art scout from Maxwell Gallery. Her elegant suit, her composed demeanor were still present, but her eyes sparkled with an almost childlike excitement. "Alara," Ms. Reed began, her voice low and earnest, yet brimming with suppressed energy. "My name is Evelyn Reed. I represent Maxwell Gallery. What you've created here tonight, it's extraordinary, truly. It's raw. It's honest. It's unlike anything I've seen in years. We believe in nurturing unique talent, in showcasing artists who dare to see the world differently." She paused, her gaze sweeping over Alara's canvas, then back to Alara's bewildered face. "Which is why, on behalf of the Maxwell Gallery and our associated institutions, I would like to offer you a full scholarship to the prestigious New York Academy of Abstract Arts." Alara gasped, a small, choked sound. The New York Academy of Abstract Arts. It was one of the most revered art schools in the country, a place she had only ever dreamed of in the quiet solitude of her bedroom, never daring to imagine it was within her reach. "Not only that," Ms. Reed continued, seeing the disbelief in Alara's eyes, "but we would also like to offer you a solo exhibition at the Maxwell Gallery within the next year, a chance to showcase your incredible work to a wider audience, to collectors, to the art world. This is just the beginning. Alara, this is where you belong." The words hung in the air, dazzling and almost incomprehensible. A scholarship, an exhibition. It wasn't just a prize, it was a future, a profound validation of her entire being. It wasn't merely material gain. It was an invitation to fully explore, to refine, and to share her unique artistic vision in an environment that celebrated the very abstract expression she had once hidden. This was the true meaning of the opportunity, the freedom to be truly herself, an artist, acknowledged and championed, while Alara was still reeling from the life-changing offer. Another drama was unfolding in the front row. Genevieve Thorne, whose meticulously crafted still life now looked utterly anemic beside Alara's pulsating masterpiece, had turned a ghastly shade of white. Her carefully constructed facade of superiority had crumbled. The applause, the praise for Alara, the sheer magnitude of Ms. Reed's offer. It was all a bitter, unbearable defeat. As Ms. Reed and Mr. Harrison gently guided Alara off the stage amidst continued congratulations, Genevieve made a move to storm out, her face contorted with fury and humiliation. But she was intercepted by Principal Sterling, who, Having been discreetly informed by Mr. Harrison about Genevieve's long-standing bullying and the recent accidental sabotage, stood with a stern expression. Ms. Thorne. Principal Sterling's voice was firm, leaving no room for argument. We need to have a serious discussion about your conduct. Your behavior towards Alara Vance, both today and over the past weeks, is unacceptable. He then gestured towards Genevieve's parents, who had been called to the school office earlier and were now standing grim-faced, having witnessed their daughter's cruel actions and her spectacular fall from grace. Your parents are waiting in my office. We will be discussing the consequences of your actions, including a possible suspension and a mandated public apology to Alara Vance. Genevieve's eyes widened in horror. A public apology. Suspension, her carefully cultivated image, her social standing, everything she had built on a foundation of superficiality and cruelty, was collapsing around her. She looked from her stone-faced parents to the triumphant Alara, her face a mask of bitter, unadulterated envy and despair. Her fate was sealed. She would lose everything. A just consequence for her calculated malice and relentless bullying. This was the downfall of antagonist type A. A bitter pill indeed. Meanwhile, Bethany, the antagonist type B who had accidentally spilled water near Alara's easel, stood frozen in the front row. Her initial fear had morphed into profound shame and a deep, aching regret as she witnessed Alara's undeniable genius. She saw the true beauty of Alara's art, and in doing so, saw the ugliness of her own complicity. As the crowd dispersed, she hesitated. Then, with a deep breath, approached Alara. Alara, Bethany began, her voice barely a whisper, her eyes downcast. I'm so sorry. About the water. About everything. I was wrong. Your art it's incredible. And you're amazing. She didn't offer excuses, only a raw, heartfelt apology. She even offered to help pack up Alara's supplies, a gesture of genuine repentance. Alara looked at Bethany, surprised by the sincerity in her voice. The anger she had felt towards Bethany's part in the sabotage faded, replaced by a quiet understanding. Bethany was not Genevieve. She had simply been misguided, swept up in the wrong crowd. Alara, with a new sense of quiet confidence, offered a small, forgiving smile. "It's okay, Bethany," she said softly. "Thank you." This simple acceptance was a profound act of grace, solidifying Bethany's path toward redemption. Later that evening, long after the auditorium had emptied and the last echoes of applause had faded, Alara sat in a quiet corner of the art room with Mr. Harrison and Miss Reed. The fluorescent lights were dimmed, casting a soft, reflective glow on the remaining art pieces. Alara cradled a warm cup of herbal tea, the aroma a comforting anchor in the whirlwind of emotions. "I still can't believe it," Alara whispered, looking from Mr. Harrison to Ms. Reed. "The scholarship, the gallery." Mr. Harrison, his eyes shining with a deep, paternal pride, smiled gently. "Alara, I always knew you had this within you. I saw it from the first day you walked into my class, doodling those complex patterns in your notebook. You have a vision, a way of seeing the world that is truly unique. You just needed the courage to show it." Ms. Reed nodded, her gaze serious. "He's right. What you call messy is what we call unfiltered genius. Your work isn't about conforming to what others expect. It's about expressing your authentic self. It's about emotion, structure, and the hidden beauty in chaos. That's what abstract art is, at its core. You don't draw objects, you draw ideas. And that is a rare and precious gift." Alara looked down at her hands, still faintly stained with paint. "It was hard," she admitted, her voice soft. "All the bullying, the feeling that no one understood. I just wanted to hide." Mr. Harrison reached out and gently placed a hand on her arm. "And that's why what you did tonight was so brave. Ilara, you faced your fears, you stood up for yourself, and you let your art speak for you. That's true courage." "Ms." Reed added, "and the beauty of it is, your journey isn't just about you. It's about every person who has ever felt misunderstood, every artist whose vision has been dismissed. You've shown them that authenticity triumphs over conformity, and that light always finds a path, even in the deepest darkness." Ilara felt a deep sense of peace settle over her, a calm that permeated her very being. The external chaos of her life, the years of feeling invisible and ridiculed, had finally given way to an internal serenity. The path ahead was daunting, but it was also exhilarating. She had found her voice, not just through her art, but through her newfound courage, and surrounded by the two people who had truly seen her. She knew, with absolute certainty, that she was finally where she was meant to be. This was her new calm, a profound resolution that promised a boundless future. 3 years later, the hum of New York City was a familiar symphony to Ilara Vance. It was a stark contrast to the quiet suburban rhythms of Northwood, yet it felt more like home than any place she had ever known. Her small studio apartment, perched on the 5th floor of a pre-war building in the vibrant Lower East Side, was a testament to her blossoming career. Sunlight streamed through the large, grimy windows, illuminating canvases leaning against every wall, tubes of paint scattered across a large work table, and brushes soaking in a jar on the windowsill. The scent of linseed oil and acrylics was her perfume, the vibrant chaos of her workspace, a mirror of the flourishing abstract landscapes that now graced galleries across the country. Ilara Vance, the girl once bullied for her messy notebooks, was now a celebrated abstract artist. Her work, characterized by its intricate layering, dynamic lines, and profound emotional resonance, had garnered critical acclaim. Her pieces were not just visually striking. They invited viewers to delve into a deeper narrative, to find meaning in the beautiful disarray, much like her early notebooks had done for her. She had embraced her unique vision, allowing her innate ability to translate complex emotions and hidden connections into visual form to flow freely, unhindered by the need for conventional representation. The New York Academy of Abstract Arts had been everything she had dreamed of and more. It was a place where messy was celebrated, where experimentation was encouraged, and where her abstract language was not just understood, but revered. She had found her tribe, a community of fellow artists who saw the world through similar, unconventional lenses. Her professors, including Ms. Evelyn Reed, who continued to mentor her closely, had pushed her to explore the boundaries of her own creativity, to delve deeper into the philosophical underpinnings of her art, and to translate the very essence of human experience into abstract form. Her first solo exhibition at the Maxwell Gallery, just a year after arriving in New York, had been a resounding success. Collectors had clamored for her pieces, and art critics had hailed her as a fresh, exciting voice in the contemporary art scene. The gallery had been packed on opening night, a dazzling array of sophisticated patrons, all captivated by the very scribbles that had once been mocked. Ilara remembered seeing Mr. Harrison in the crowd, his eyes brimming with pride, and even Bethany, the girl who had once tried to sabotage her, now a genuine admirer, sending her an encouraging smile from across the room. Her personal life, too, had blossomed. Her relationship with her mother, who had always quietly supported her, deepened. Her mother, now retired, often came to visit. Her eyes filled with a quiet pride as she saw Ilara living her dream. They would spend hours talking, not just about art, but about life, about the journey Ilara had taken, and the profound lessons learned. Ilara still kept her original, canvas-covered sketchpad. It sat on a special shelf in her studio, not as a relic of past shame, but as a cherished artifact of her origin, a tangible reminder of where her journey truly began. Its pages, still filled with their intricate, uninhibited designs, were now a source of quiet strength and inspiration, a testament to the raw, untamed talent that had always been within her. But Alara's journey was not just about personal success. The memory of the bullying, of feeling isolated and misunderstood, had instilled in her a profound empathy for others who felt the same. She believed, fiercely, that every child, regardless of their background or the messiness of their expression, deserved the chance to have their voice heard, to have their unique talent seen. Inspired by this conviction, Alara had established the Unveiled Canvas, a nonprofit foundation dedicated to providing art supplies, mentorship, and creative safe spaces for underprivileged children and teenagers who felt misunderstood or marginalized because of their unconventional talents. The foundation operated out of a brightly lit community center in Brooklyn, its walls now adorned with vibrant, uninhibited abstract art created by young hands. Every Saturday, Alara would spend her mornings at the Unveiled Canvas, teaching workshops. She didn't teach them to draw perfectly realistic still lifes or meticulously proportioned portraits. Instead, she encouraged them to draw their feelings, their dreams, their inner worlds. No matter how messy or abstract they might seem, she would tell them her own story, sharing how her scribbles had become her voice, how her perceived weaknesses had become her greatest strengths. She showed them that true art wasn't about replication, but about expression, about finding one's unique visual language. Today was one such Saturday. The room buzzed with the joyful chaos of creation. Children, some as young as 7, others shy teenagers, were bent over tables, their faces smeared with paint, their hands confidently wielding brushes and charcoal. They were painting with an uninhibited freedom that warmed Alara's heart. One young boy, perhaps 10 years old, had created a swirling, fiery abstract piece that he called My Anger, its intense colors and jagged lines a raw, honest expression of his emotions. Another girl, quiet and thoughtful like Alara herself once was, meticulously drew delicate, interconnected patterns that she explained were the hidden connections between all living things. Alara moved among them, offering gentle guidance, a quiet word of encouragement, a reassuring smile. She wasn't a celebrity artist here. She was a mentor, a guide, a fellow traveler on the artistic path. She saw herself in every one of them, the quiet ones, the misunderstood ones, the ones whose imaginations soared beyond the conventional. She paused beside a young girl named Lily, who was carefully painting a series of overlapping, translucent shapes in soft pastels. Lily looked up, her eyes wide with a question. "Ms. Vance," she whispered, "is it okay if my lines aren't straight, and if it doesn't really look like anything real?" Alara smiled. A genuine, radiant smile that reached her eyes. She knelt down, placing a gentle hand on Lily's shoulder. "Lily," she said softly, "your lines are perfect because they are your lines. And art doesn't have to look like anything real to be true. It just has to be real to you. It has to come from your heart." She picked up a blank canvas, a pristine white rectangle, and held it up to the group of eager young faces. It wasn't a challenge or a daunting task. It was an invitation, a symbol of boundless possibilities. "This," she announced, her voice clear and resonant, "is not just a canvas. It's an empty page waiting for your unique story. It's a world waiting to be created by you." The children looked at the blank canvas, then at Alara, their eyes shining with inspiration and a newfound courage. Alara smiled, her own journey a living testament to the transformative power of art, courage, and self-acceptance. The quiet girl who had once hidden her messy notebooks now stood proudly, a beacon of creativity, her life a vibrant symphony of abstraction, echoing with the triumphant truth that genius often lies in the most unexpected and beautifully unconventional places. If this story stirred your heart, if it reminds you that courage can alter destinies, and that light always finds a path even in the deepest darkness, please leave a comment. Share this story with those who need inspiration. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell to never miss our upcoming stories.